Hello and welcome. Today I'm adding Snow Bros from the Tower Plan Arcade Collection 1 to my ever-growing list where I rank every Evercade game ever. Snow Bros is a single-screen elimination platformer where you control Nick or Tom, two snowmen, and you have to clear 3 levels of enemies. It's fairly straightforward stuff as far as elimination platformers go. I think you know the deal by now. I've covered enough of them in this series. The gimmick on this one is you throw snow at your enemies. You throw it at them enough to turn them into snowballs, and then you can kick the snowballs to make it roll across the screen. The story is very simple. An evil king has kidnapped the princesses and turns Nick and Tom into snowmen, and you have to rescue the princess, or princesses.
Nostalgia.
Snow Bros is a game that I've been aware of for years. I remember it being, I think there was a port for the Amiga in the works that was previewed in magazines. I think that's where I first heard of it. But I don't think I actually played it until the Evercade. So, yeah, not much nostalgia here.
Graphics.
In many ways, it looks like a very typical elimination platformer, with cute enemy designs, the usual platform look you get from such games, although it has a slightly unique style to it. The designs may be cute, but they're also ugly. The colours are bright, but also a bit muted, at least in comparison to other similar games. It has it's a very Tower Plan looking game, not so much their shoot-em-ups, but their non-shoot-em-ups, in a way that Warden is a slightly unconventional looking platform, or Demon's World has a slightly ugly look to it. Not that the back graphics are bad, but there is a sort of underlying ugliness to the art style, but it still has a charm to it, and everything is well done. It's well rendered, everything's clear and readable, and I suppose it really comes down to personal preference as to whether you like the visual style.
Sound and music.
The sound effects are pretty typical for this kind of game. It very much sounds like an FM synth style sound chip being used, and it's jolly cheerful stuff with your usual audio cues for what you need. Everything's well done. The music, again, is very typical of an elimination platformer. It's jolly, bouncy and catchy. However, in the same way that the graphics have an underlying sort of ugliness to them or in the design, I find the sound and music has a similar off-kilter vibe to it.
Gameplay.
As I mentioned earlier, you throw snowballs at enemies until they become giant snowballs, then you can kick them to send them bouncing around the screen, and anything it hits in the way will be injured. If you're in the way of your own snowballs, you'll bounce with it. You won't be injured, fortunately, being a snowman, I guess. Anyway, this can be a good way of chaining enemy kills together, which naturally give you score bonuses. It can be very satisfying to get all the enemies in one snowball. There are a few power-ups, including faster movement, more snow per shot, larger range, and so on and so forth. There's also a power-up where you become large and will, invincible to enemies. It's a sort of I don't know how to describe it, you can see it on screen. There are also boss battles every 10 levels, and as with most elimination platformers, if you take too long on a level, an unkillable monster will come along. As I said, all very standard stuff for an elimination platformer, but it does feel more challenging than most of them. There's a variety of different enemies, some of which can be very fast. Also, your snowmen are not the most responsive and fast moving characters. And naturally it has multiplayer, which certainly adds to a chaotic thing where you can sabotage your colleague or share strategies, combining your snowball rolling antics.
Overall opinion.
Snow Bros is a good elimination platformer, one that's well regarded, has a lot going for it, but something doesn't quite work for me, and I've never quite been able to put my finger on exactly what it is. It's got all the right ingredients: fairly charming graphics and upbeat tone, smart level design, a rewarding scoring system, and some good co-op action, but it's never quite clicked with me in the same way as Bubble Bobble or Tumble Pop, and it reminds me of many of Tower Plan's other games, as in their games that are not shoot-em-ups, because their shoot-em-ups are second to none. But almost every time they did something different and experimented with other genres, they made an interesting version of what they were going for, but they also felt quite different from anything else in that genre, which ultimately leaves me liking Snow Bros, but not loving it as much as many others seem to. Normally this is where I would do my ranking, but there is of course more Snow Bros games on the Evercade. So first of all, I'm going to start with Snow Brothers, which is what the NES port of Snow Bros is called on the Evercade. To access this, you need Turplan Arcade Collection 3 and 4 inserted into your Evercade VS or Alpha, and you'll be able to play it. It is of course a fairly straightforward NES port of Snow Bros. The graphics are very garish, but they're a pretty good representation of the arcade. Everything's clear and readable, even if it isn't the most visually appealing. The sound and music are fine, but they do feel almost more old school arcade. Again, I suppose a limitation of the NES hardware, but then again the NES could do much better music as well, but it's fine. The gameplay is largely the same, but it's pretty much exactly the same aside from limitations of the hardware. And again, it is a pretty good port of the arcade original, and in some ways it feels like it plays slightly better in the movement of the characters, but overall I do think it is a lesser port, as you would expect, despite your player controls feeling ever so slightly more responsive than the arcade original. And finally there is Snow Bros 2, which can be found on Turplan Arcade 4. Originally released in 1994, it takes the formula of Snow Bros, adds a 4-player mode and 4 different playable characters. Although the base mechanics of them is pretty much the same as in the original Snow Bros. You attack enemies repeatedly to turn them into snowballs or something, and you launch them across the screen. Although each player feels different and their attacks do vary. One turns them into water, one into tornadoes, and so on and so forth. And the movement of each character does feel a bit different. But first of all, I have to say, what the hell is up with the character portraits on the character select screen? That is nightmare fuel. But anyway, let's go on to the details of the game, starting with
graphics.
Despite the ugliness of that character select screen, the graphics are much like they are in the first game, just improved with the 4 years later coming out and better technology. Everything's a little bit more polished visually, but also for a 1994 game, you could hardly call it an amazing looker.
Sound and music.
Again, due to improvements in technology between 1990 and 1994, the sound and music is better here on a technical level. The sounds, I would just say, are outright better. The music does sound clearer with more channels and more going on. Oh, maybe, like I said, the sound chip is better. But honestly, I don't think the compositions are as good. It's still fine, it suits the type of game it is, but it just doesn't quite work for me as well as in the first game.
Gameplay.
While the core gameplay is largely the same as the original Snow Bros, having 4 unique characters with their own movement speeds does mix things up a bit. But it's not just that, there's more variety in stages and enemies. There are stages where you ascend vertically in an almost Rainbow Island style. You've still got your bosses and your present stages for bonuses. You also have, in a tumble pop style, letter collections to spell out the word extra for bonuses, and so on and so forth.
Overall opinion.
Snow Bros 2 does what a sequel should do, builds upon the formula of the first game without detracting from it. It's very much safe to say if you like Snow Bros, you'll like Snow Bros 2. Although I think it is a little bit less polished overall, possibly due to it being one of Turplan's final games, it's still a very good sequel. So that's all the games covered, so time to get on with the
ranking.
So starting off with the original Snow Bros, I'm going to place it above 40 Winks, but below Aero the Acrobats 2. The NES port Snow Brothers I'm going to place above Fancy World Earth of Crisis, but below Radical Bikers. And finally Snow Bros 2, I'm going to place it above 40 Winks, but below the original Snow Bros. As for how that means they all place on the list, it puts Snow Bros at 119 out of 370 odd games, Snow Bros 2 at 120, and Snow Brothers at 198. Anyway, I think that's everything for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.